Guys, let's get straight back to it. We are now in the Hilo tab. In the previous video we talked about the 60 points Lahatut being a useless piece of crap because it uses the Mapat's delivery system, and the stats on it do not represent what's really going on with this unit. Now we also have here the Lahatut Orev. It is a better unit with more accuracy than the Mapats, even though the stats show otherwise and do not reflect that. It costs even less, only 40 points, but still the delivery system on it is not too great. You got the TOW 2, which is incredible, what we saw on the Super Cobra super weapon. You got the ITOW, which is good, and the worst of the lot is what you get when you're using that helicopter, simply named TOW. Only 4 missiles on it with 15 AP power on each missile, so almost useless unit. You might kill a tank letting this unit empty everything it has on it if the tank in question has very weak armor on it, or if you made a couple of lucky side shots on it, if you are extremely lucky. Again, nothing too special, but at least not completely useless unit, but just almost useless unit. Okay, let's sift through the other choices you got in this tab. You got the Cefa E and the Cefa B, which are solid and much more palatable choices. They are attack helicopters. They are not amazing, but they do get the job done, and you are getting exactly what you are paying for when using them in terms of points spent, which is quite remarkable, I should say, when using the Israeli deck, because mostly everything in the Israeli deck is way overpriced and not cost effective. So the Cefa B and the Cefa E both can target ground units with rocket pods, and you are paying a little bit of extra on the Cefa E to have a Stinger missiles on it, so it can engage air units as well. Okay, the Petin. Come on you guys, 130 points for what? Why am I paying 130 points for that thing? Who would use such a unit in its current state? This unit should cost you 105 points, not a single point more considering what you are getting. Seems to me that somebody at Eugen's system fell asleep at the keyboard when given a price on that thing. Fell asleep on a number of occasions while giving prices on Israeli units in the game, for that matter. Everything in the Israeli deck is overpriced. Why? Why the Petin costs so goddamn much? It costs even more than the West Germany super weapon Tiger, and it doesn't even have exceptional recon abilities on it, not even good optics for that matter. So why did they overprice it so goddamn much? Guys, the entire West Germany faction is even 10 times stronger than the Israeli deck. Nothing here makes sense. Nothing makes sense. Nothing can justify the price of having that unit for 130 points. Nothing. For the sake of argument, let's compare it to other nations that have the same type of unit, okay? Off the top of my head, I know of the NORAD deck that has the very same helicopter, but it's supposed to... I mean, I think it's the same helicopter. Let's go over it and check it out. Let's compare it first, but... let's compare first to the Super Cobra, okay? The super weapon Super Cobra. The Cobra has seed missiles, right? You remember that we talked about the Super Cobra in the previous video, that it has seed missiles, so it can take out anti-aircraft radar carrying systems, which is a huge advantage by itself, and it has a TOW 2 delivery systems. The missiles it uses are faster and more accurate than the Hellfires the Petin uses. It also has a cannon, same as the Petin. It also has a cannon, but the Petin might have a better cannon, but the Cobra fires more than twice as fast, and the Cobra is a faster flying vehicle, 350 kph, and the Petin only has 280 kph. Considering optics, the Petin has medium optics and the Cobra has poor, but considering such optics types, both will need a reconnaissance vehicle to scout out for them. So the advantage of the Petin cannot be expressed to overshine the Cobra in that matter. I mean, as a standalone unit. The Cobra costs 100 points, while the Petin costs 130 points. So the Cobra is a far better unit. You will get a hell of a lot out of it, more. I mean, you will get a hell of a lot more out of it than what you are getting with the Patton, but it costs 30 points less. So I know what you're going to say and what you're thinking of right now, that comparing the Patton to a super weapon is not fair. It's not a valid argument, because a super weapon, as mentioned before, super weapons are supposed to be cost effective with staggering edge on them, but unless they give the Israeli deck at least 2 primary weapons and 1 super weapon, this argument does become valid. You see, it is my contention that if you give other decks staggering abilities in certain units to compensate for the deficiencies in certain areas in their decks, you should do exactly the same when it comes to the Israeli deck. But let's disregard everything about the comparison between those 2 units and move on. Let's make another and more equitable and fitting comparison. Let's compare the Patton to the NORAD deck Apache. Here we go. You can see it is basically the same unit, only that the Apache costs less and also has a rocket pod. So it has a vaster array of weapons. To sum it up, you could say that West Germany, for example, has the biggest deficiency problem in its helicopter tab, not having attack helicopters, same as Israel, you know, in its helicopter tab. It only has very, very, very good ATGM helicopters, while the Israeli deck has attack helicopters and very, very shitty ATGM helicopters that are useless, so you're not going to use them. So how does the West Germany deck makes up for that deficiency? By having a very cost-effective super weapon like the Tiger, exceptional optics on it and good stealth, with very good anti-air, anti-ground rocket pods and ATGMs. Least we forget it also has an anti-air weapon. While Israel is making up for not having good ATGM helicopters by having a very overpriced ATGM helicopter, lacking key weapons on it. So you see, let's be fair. Israel has no deficiency in that tab, in the helicopter tab. The Patton is just way too much overpriced, but no real problems here, and we can move on. Right, vehicles tab. We are in the vehicles tab now. Your options here are diverse but rather limited when you thoroughly examine what you are getting here. I call this tab Maybe I'll Get Lucky with Those Units tab. You got 3 options here that are completely pointless to even consider. The Japas Jeep, the Hammer Mapats, and the Giraffe Tow. All 3 of them are in the almost useless units department. The Japas and the Giraffe are using tow delivery system, which is, as said before, the weakest tow delivery system out of the tow line. Low AP power, bad travel time on their missiles with bad accuracy when you test them in action. The Mapats we talked about in the previous video is an almost meaningless delivery system. It just gives the false impression of being any good on paper, but it is total shit, so you dare not even try using it. And we are really left with 5 options: the Hammer Orev, the Giraffe Ito, the Hafiz, the Pere, and the Sherman. The Hammer Orev and the Giraffe Ito use the same delivery system, the Ito, which is pretty decent. The Orev travels fast with no armor, and the Giraffe Ito is slow with a slight improvement in armor. On their own, both units are useless, and both must be relied upon other units to scout out for them in order for them to be effective to some degree. They are practically defenseless, both of them in short and long ranges, against anything that comes across their path. Air, helos, infantry, and armored units alike will basically overpower them at any turn unless they get very, very lucky and say an armored unit will miss while opening fire on them. But when used correctly with combinations with other units, both the Giraffe Ito and the Orev can prove to be very effective, especially from long distances when your enemy is not engaging them but engaging other units in their vicinity. So basically they are both ATGM teams on wheels, and they are very good support units. The Sherman is a decent unit. Great armor on it considering its price, great gun using heat rounds with good AP power considering its price, good fire rate, great availability, so you can use them in large numbers, but this unit has deficiencies that completely decimate the good features it has on it. It has no machine gun, and the range it can travel is limited to almost nothing, so they represent a logistical nightmare if you're trying to use them. But still, you should consider using them because they can prove to be very useful in a number of limited situations, and they can provide to help you with very well planned limited push moves in small areas in the map, providing you got the time needed to mass them in large quantities, and providing your opponent is just sitting there not doing anything and holding his positions without keeping any pressure on your front lines. The Hafiz and the Pere both are using the best ATGM delivery missile system in the game, the Spikenelos. The range is above average, almost 3 kilometers of range, 27 AP power on them. I think both of these units were originally intended to be the primary or super weapons of the Israeli deck, but both cannot be considered as such, and let me explain why. The deficiencies those units have completely overshadow and overclad the unit's abilities. They are not cost effective, the price is very high, 80 points and 110 points, and on their own they are completely defenseless. They have very poor optics, both are needed to be relied on other units to scout for them in order for them to be effective to some degree, and both will die from a sneeze by any unit in the game that spits in their direction. Other decks have ATGM, armored and wheeled systems that cost a hell of a lot less and can even prove to be more useful to you when playing 1 versus 1, have a far better accuracy than what you're getting when you're using the Hafiz and the Pere, and here are some examples. Those units that you are shown here come with better accuracy and availability. Yes, they have less range than the Hafiz and the Pere, but in 1 versus 1 you will be far better off enjoying getting the same results out of them, paying less points and having them in greater numbers. Now, it is true that the Hafiz and the Pere have stabilizers on them. The Hafiz has 40% stabilizer, allowing it to fire on the move, which grants it an advantage over the other ATGM wheeled and armored units. But really, the last thing you would want to do when using such a fragile unit is to move it around for it to be discovered and targeted when spotted. Because again, being a very fragile unit, it is most likely to be easily destroyed by anything that is firing on it. So yet another presumable advantage that cannot be used to much effect. Same as a lot of advantages this deck houses within itself, only to give the false impression of being a superior deck, when in actual fact, in 1 versus 1, it is a far inferior than all of the other decks in the game. I think it is only fair by Eugen to be much more decisive when it comes to the Hafiz and Pere. I think it's only fair for Eugen not to go just halfway, but to go the full stretch and grant the Hafiz and the Pere primary weapon status, as I presume was initially intended, by buffing their characteristics. So the distinction between them, the Hafiz and the Pere, and the other units in their class will be much more noticeable distinctions. And distinctions, by features that can undeniably be recognized by adding armor to them and maybe a machine gun. So as you can see, other decks also use ATGM wheeled and armored units, and they even use and have such units that are not defenseless in shorter ranges like the Hafiz and the Pere. Some cost a hell of a lot less, come in better availability in numbers, and some are even using Recon abilities on them, allowing them to be very self-sufficient and combat effective on their own, as opposed to the Hafiz and the Pere that just cost way too much, not delivering the same potency in battle that they are most certainly expected to deliver, considering their higher price and the great missiles they carry on them. This is just yet another classic case of amazing units that their deficiencies just overshadow and overcloud their abilities, rendering them unable to fulfill their promise when used in battle. So the Hafiz and the Pere have amazing features on them, 27 AP power and almost 3 kilometers of range, which are considered, those features are considered staggering edge, no doubt, and can be used to take out a super heavy tank if you hit that tank a couple or 3 times. But the cost of getting them to the field and the fact that they are very, very fragile, furthermore, the fact that they cannot be self-sufficient or combat effective on their own, just exemplifies why you would think twice on spending such a big amount of points to call them into your service in 1 versus 1 battle while playing against a human opponent. They are the best weapon in the game against a stupid AI if you are playing against the computer, but here we are strictly considering improving this deck for it to be able to contend against a human opponent in 1 versus 1 battle. And in that case, they prove to be lacking major elements for them to be considered worthy combat effective units or good enough units to justify their high price when compared to other units in their class on other decks that can perform just as well or even outperform them with better accuracy, better cost effectiveness and availability. Here is a suggestion on how you are making those units super weapons, as I presume was initially intended for them to be. You give the Hafiz medium optics, frontal armor of 12 points, side armor of 6 points, and 2 machine guns to go along with it. You give the Pere good optics, frontal armor of 18 points, side armor of 8 points, and twin machine guns to go along with it. But as it stands now, I will be satisfied if Eugen will only give those units the necessary buff they need to only justify their high prices. Just by adding 3 frontal armor on each of them, and that would be more than enough to justify the high price of getting them to the field. So adding 3 frontal armor to both the Hafiz and Pere will certainly not make them super weapons, but it will elevate them to the primary weapon status as I presume was initially intended. And the Israeli deck will finally have something in its deck that can really shine in battle and be considered a real threat when confronted by other decks. Same as other decks have units that present real threat when faced and are considered trademarks to those very same other decks. Alright, now let's move on to the Israeli Air Tab. The Israeli Air Tab. Okay, before we even begin, I think it is only fair to mention that the Israeli Air Tab is a good and decent Air Tab. You can get a good performance out of it. Again, it is a good and decent Air Tab. Not great, but just good, because it does have some cost effectiveness issues and availability is very strict. But overall, you can get a lot out of it by using it correctly. I've seen someone complain about the Israeli Air Tab, claiming it to be the best Air Tab in the game, saying that each plane is a nuke plane and each ASF is the strongest ASF in the game. Just for shits and giggles, I will show you how wrong he is just by comparing the Israeli Air Tab to one other deck Air Tab, and the China deck Air Tab can serve as a great example for that matter. Just make a note of the fact that this is not even the strongest Air Tab in the game. I mean, the China deck is not even the strongest Air Tab in the game, and you will face even better Air Tabs when playing 1 versus 1. Most players in 1 versus 1 use better decks than the China deck with better Air Tabs. It's really easy to throw it out there and say stupid things without really examining what you're really getting when you're using the Israeli deck Air Tab, as opposed to what you're getting when you're using other Air Tabs in the game, in other decks. When playing 1 versus 1, the thing to consider is what you want to get out of your units, that is, the units that you're using. There are important factors like availability, cost effectiveness, and combat effectiveness. Basically, using units in the game, especially in 1 versus 1, the thing that should be most important to you is what can I get out of my units for the most reasonable and cost-effective price that will be effective in combat with great numbers in terms of availability, and not what people tend to say when they judge the Israeli deck Air Tab. Like this, stupid asshole anti-Semitic Nazi fuck who named himself Hitler Flower, on Reddit, and got 22 likes from Jew haters, not because he was right on anything, but just because he expressed his misgivings about restoring balance to this deck and giving the Israeli nation the power it rightfully deserves. in this game. I think it rightfully deserves to be more powerful in order for it to be able to face other decks with decency on even terms. This comparison I'm about to make here will just show you exactly what I mean by that and why the Israeli deck air tab is a good air tab. There's no question about it. But it is not the best air tab in the game, not even close of being the best air tab in the game. You are more likely to face far better air tabs when you're facing other nations, and that much is certain. A lot of nations have a better air tab than the Israeli air tab. Let's make an analogy comparing the Israeli air tab to the China air tab. Air superiority fighter is an air superiority fighter, and what I mean by that is something that is very easy and simple to explain. Unless you are a very dense individual, certain units have a concept behind them. They are there to serve a purpose, and if you can achieve specific results out of one unit and achieve the very same results out of another unit that resembles it, it doesn't really matter if one of them is called a pigeon and the other one is called the invincible ultra super duper ultimate nuclear hyper mega doomsday flying diaper. All right, again, the name does not carry any meaning. All that matters is what you are able to achieve using those units. Now pay attention, please, because the next part is very important. Availability is important, and when the Israeli deck can put up 4 normal air superiority fighters using 2 slots for that purpose, the China deck can put up 6 cheaper and better air superiority fighters using 2 slots for that purpose. All the bombers that will cost you 135 points using the Israeli deck, you have almost the exact same copy of them in the China deck, but for far lesser price in terms of points. For example, the Kurnas in the China deck is named Q5D. It costs 115 points, not 135, and you even have 1 more extra plane per card, so you are getting a better cost and availability when using it with the China deck as opposed to using it in the overpriced Israeli deck. You could easily test for yourself that what I'm telling you here is the truth. You can test it in the field, just arrange a mock battle and test it for yourself, and see for yourself that even when on paper the Q5D makes less HE power damage, when tested in combat it performs just as well as the Kurnas. The best way to prove that to you, to prove that I'm telling you the truth, is by showing you. If you don't believe me, just believe your eyes. The way to test if it can match the Kurnas ability is very simple. The Kurnas can destroy a super heavy tank if it strikes it twice with a direct hit. I'm going to show you here and now that when using the Q5D, you can do exactly the same thing and destroy the very same super heavy tank with the same 2 bombing run strikes.
נעים המפקד? קח את המשקפת וואי. סיירים בעיקון המפקד. דוח מצב.
Okay, as you just witnessed, both planes hit the Merkava Baz tank frontal armor. There was no trickery involved here, and you can test it for yourself at your leisure. No one is stopping you. Let's carry on with our comparison. The Kfir bomber, when used in the Israeli overpriced deck, will cost you 125 points, but in the China deck under a different name, the J7H, it will cost you a mere 80 points, and you are getting even 2 extra units per card when using it. This is incredible. I mean, the margins are the margins between those decks are just astounding. I mean, what you get with the China deck and what you get with the Israeli deck is in comparison. The Barak anti-tank plane, the Israeli deck is using for 135 points. In the China deck under a different name will cost you 120 points, and you will also get more units per card when using it. So this is also yet another unit that you get for a lesser price with better availability when using the China deck. Let's talk about ASFs. If we are using 2 slots in both decks, in the China deck you will get 6 ASFs, 3 of them elite and 3 of them hardened that cost less. While when using 2 slots in the Israeli deck, you will get less effective 2 elite ASF planes in the form of the Baz and 2 rookie veterancy ASFs in the form of the Baz Meshupar. 4 ASFs in total as opposed to 6 when using the China deck. Again, it will cost you a hell of a lot more points getting aircraft when using the Israeli deck with far less availability, veterancy, and combat efficiency. Let's break it down again. Using the Israeli deck, you would pay 170 points for the heavier ASF instead of only 135 points when using the China deck. And the China deck will have 1 more unit per card on hardened veterancy as opposed to the rookie veterancy you are getting with the Baz Meshupar. Again, all this when the China deck heavy ASF is even arguably a stronger ASF than the Baz Meshupar. We will go into that in a moment. This is just an example on how inferior the Israeli air tab really is when compared to other nations' air tabs in the game. Also, you got ASF in the Baltic front that will kill all Israeli ASF without any trouble at all, adding to the fact that those decks are 10 times stronger than the Israeli deck. So really, what the hell some of those eccentric people want from the Israeli deck? I think people are just knobs or stupid or both to complain about this deck. It only shows that they have no clue what they are blabbing about, or maybe they are just being anti-Semitic assholes. Anyway, let's get back to the matter at hand and deepen our analysis on those 2 decks. The Baz Fighter, you can get 2 planes, elite, 100 points each. China, you can get 3 planes, elite, 100 points each. So right off the bat, you got better availability than Israel when using the China deck. Baz long-range missiles, 7 kilometers, 40% accuracy. The China has the same thing. Baz short-range missiles range 3 kilometers, 500 meters, but China has better range with 4 kilometers, 200 meters on the short missiles. Baz gun 20 millimeter, the China gun 23 millimeter. Enough said, you get better availability on a better plane using the China deck. And let's move on and compare now the heavier ASFs between those 2 decks. The Baz Meshupar, 170 points. You got 2 planes on the lowest skill veterancy level of rookie. You got guns 20 millimeter. The equivalent in the China deck is far better, I think. Su-27 of the China deck will cost you only 135 points. You get 3 of them on the skill level veterancy of a veteran. That is the 4th skill level. 30 millimeter guns on them, so also better guns. Short range missiles on the 170 points Baz Meshupar are the same as you are getting when you are using the China ASF that cost the China 135 points. You get 10% more accuracy using the Baz, but guess what? It does not make much of a difference, 50 or 60%. It is almost the same thing when taking into consideration the veterancy superiority factor using the China plane. The China deck plane has a veteran veterancy instead of the Israeli plane rookie veterancy. It is more likely that the China deck 135 points plane will be better and more accurate than the buzz. And don't forget, it costs the China deck to put that aircraft in the skies 35 points less, and you can have one extra plane per card when using it. Another important thing to consider is that the long-range missiles on the China deck Su-27 are better than what you are getting when you're using the Baz Meshupar. With 8 kilometers, 400 meters of range, the Baz only have 7 kilometers of range, so it is very likely that the 135 points ASF that the China is using will hit the Israeli ASF first, stun it and kill it. It has better range and veterancy, 3 levels of veterancy above the Buzz. And guess what? A little cherry on top, the China plane will make even more HE damage with its long-range missiles, 6 points of HE damage, while the Buzz will only make 5. The ASF China is using is more likely to hit first and do far greater damage, stun and kill the Israeli ASF. So, and all of that, and you're paying less to get it, and you have it in greater numbers with better veterancy. Enough said. Okay, let's move on. The Recon tab, we start off by examining the Bedouins. The Bedouins gives the false impression of being an incredible, potent and combat efficient, cost-effective unit. At first glance, by looking at their stats and weapons, you might even think that they possess the same weapon, same as what the Spetsnaz are using, which is a very, very powerful sniper rifle. Both the sniper rifles of the Bedouins and the Spetsnaz, as presented in the armory, give the misleading false impression of being the identical same weapon with the same amount of potency, but when you examine those weapons in practice, in the field, in battle, in combat, the Bedouin sniper rifle accuracy is more like 60% and not 95%, what you are clearly getting when using the Spetsnaz, 95% accuracy. The Bedouin's sniper rifle even fires slower than the Spetsnaz sniper rifle. Also, the Spetsnaz sniper rifle weapon is 50 times more effective and powerful, and it is even reflected by the trail the Spetsnaz sniper rifle leaves behind it when it fires. Also, the Spetsnaz sniper rifle can take out weak armored vehicles in a relative short amount of time, while the Bedouins will need the duration of, say, I don't know, Lord of the Rings movie to take out the very same vehicle with their sniper rifle. I'm talking about armored units here that have weak armor and are not defenseless. You have no power here, Bedouins. Any unit in the game that has a weapon is most likely to overrun your Bedouins. Even militia infantry units pose a great threat to them. The Bedouins are a very, very weak unit. They lack key weapons, not having anything to deal with armored units as opposed to all other Recon infantry units in the game. They are inferior in every way to any infantry unit that comes across their path that will meet them in battle. Basically, on their own, they are just target practice. They mainly serve as spotters for your army, nothing more. They cannot be relied upon to provide you with any effective, meaningful support in terms of their fighting capabilities, which are limited to say the least. I mean, they might kill off a few infantry stragglers that are in their vicinity, but as far as a fighting force, they are clearly not influential. So again, when playing the Israeli deck, you are forced to consider them only as spotters because they have recon abilities, while taking into account the fact of them being almost defenseless. If they had the same weapon, same as the Spetsnaz group, I would most certainly consider them a primary weapon, and they would be very efficient and very beneficial to you. Right now they're still beneficial because they possess recon abilities, and as spotters they can be used to much effect. I think they should be added a short range allow weapon, nothing too powerful, 525 meters short range allow AP power of 8 points, just so they won't be completely defenseless as opposed to what all other nations' decks are using. Even if added that short range low AP power weapon of 8 points, when clearly other recon infantry units in the game are getting a hell of a lot more than that, they would still be inferior when compared to other recon infantry units in the game, but at least they won't be completely defenseless and will be able to contribute in some shape or form to your army other than just being spotters. I think it is only fair to buff them a little bit so their inferiority to other recon infantry units in the game would be still noticeable but not tremendously abysmal. So to conclude, as things stand now, they are combat ineffective and require a buff, no doubt about that. Alright, let's move to the HVMS Recon vehicle. The HVMS Recon vehicle, it is a very interesting unit, great gun with incredible fire rate on it, but the deficiencies that come along with it. No stabilizers, a very, very fragile, weak armor, and no machine guns whatsoever. I mean, no machine guns, nothing. Practically no protection at all against infantry. Any infantry unit can just walk up to it and put a bomb in its tailpipe and bye-bye HVMS. Pretty much relegates this unit to the ranks of underlings. It is defenseless for the most part, and again, the lack of a bit of extra attributes negates the great features this unit has on it. As shown in the first video, if you remember, even when awaiting in cover for enemy units, enemy troop carrier managed to kill 2 of them, one after the other, with its auto cannon. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying that this unit is combat ineffective, but I would definitely say that this is yet another case of Eugen unwilling to commit and unwilling to go the full stretch in giving an Israeli unit, whatever it might be, good combat effectiveness, overall ability. And, just Eugen sugarcoating units with astounding abilities that really cannot be used or exploited to their full potential, having deficiencies that drag the promising features of those units down to the ground. So when using the Israeli deck, you always get something, that, on paper shines and looks like it is the best thing ever to have. And then when you test it and when in practice, when you use it, you find out that the deficiencies just crash those attributes, those features, those good features, they crash them down to the ground. So you won't be able to enjoy any good unit that has overall good fighting capabilities. So disappointing. Again, let's move on. The M Patrol. The M Patrol is a very fragile unit, no armor on it. For all intensive purposes, it is a spotter. It is just a spotter, nothing more. It can reach very far places on the map with its good autonomy and very fast off-road speed, but only as a spotter. Once it gets there, it can practically do nothing. So to conclude, a spotter but combat ineffective, and any wise ass that would say that those machine guns are capable of achieving much probably need more time dealing with good adversaries in 1 versus 1, because a unit with no armor on it and only machine guns deep within enemy lines would only be able to kill defenseless units, and facing good opponents that would simply not happen. Good players always place at least one unit defending their rear areas to protect the CVs. Alright, so let's carry on. The RAM TCM. The RAM TCM, essentially it is a BTR with better autonomy, better off-road speed, has a bit of stealth on it and recon ability, but it is not much of a bargain. Very, very expensive considering what you are getting. I, for one, in most cases wish to reserve the slot for more important units. It is a better unit than the BTR, no doubt, but again, very overpriced and not justifying its cost. I think the price of getting it should be reduced by 5 points and availability increased to 9 units instead of 7. Alright, the RAM AT. The RAM AT, 30% accuracy. It is a very, very weak and fragile unit, cost effective, only 20 points. And it can reach the front lines pretty damn fast, but really it cannot contend with what it might encounter there, especially with that accuracy of 30% and its slow rate of fire, 7 rounds per minute. So again, being very fragile, it is not much of a combat effective unit. The Siphon, a very good spotter unit, no weapons on it. You can use it to babysit other units to provide recon for them. Not combat effective, not at the slightest. It has no weapon. The Tyran Blazer, very good recon tank, very cost effective with a decent gun, 13 AP power, but the fire rate of 7 rounds per minute means it is a very slow firing unit. If this unit would have had, 9 rounds per minute rate of fire, it would have most definitely been a primary weapon, but as it stands now, it is a somewhat mediocre combat effective unit, but okay, so you should consider using it. And finally, let's go over to the Maglans and talk about them, and also let's talk about the Recon tab Yasu while in the process. The Maglans. Maglans are practically one of the very few standalone combat effective units in this deck. This unit, the Maglan unit, can actually achieve something it can see, and it could use very effective ATGM missiles. They are combat effective in CQC to some degree, and I say to some degree because again, how can we not have a deficiency to go along with them? After all, this is the Israeli deck we are talking about here, where everything is sugar coated to look amazing and to look great, but in practice you are sure to find out that this deck psyched and punked you in some form or another. 5-man crew instead of 10 literally means you cut down this unit effectiveness by half. It means that this unit can be killed by being fired upon by a tank this unit is currently engaging, and it also means that this unit can be overpowered by a single infantry unit that outnumber them 10-5 and comes across their path. So all that promise and all that faith in that unit almost goes down the shitter, almost goes down the drain. You can order them in groups and get the 10-man crew effect by ordering that unit twice and stacking them, but considering the high cost of 80 points in order for you to achieve that, and considering that there is nothing to go along with them into battle, because the minimum price to achieve that is with the Noon transport, and that transport has no weapons. It is a transport, nothing more. Basically means that in terms of cost effectiveness dynamics in 1 versus 1, you are paying a ridiculous price that spending such an amount of points would be more damaging to you instead of being beneficial to you. 80 points for 10-man crew is a ridiculously high price to pay. So, as always, And as true when it comes to most of the units in this deck, they fall just a bit short of being a very combat effective units on their own, always being downsided by major deficiencies to deny them the ability to really shine in battle as standalone units on their own. The Asur can serve a prime example to that effect, having an incredible fire delivery system and range, but while being in the Recon tab and while it is supposed to be a Recon troop carrier transport helicopter, having poor optics to it and no armor on it at all, just drags it down, making it a far less effective unit, relegating it to be considered more of a big fat target to be shot down from the skies instead of something to be feared, admired and respected in battle. Having the lack of just a bit more additional much needed attributes for it to be regarded as a great unit. So to sum it up, changes most certainly would have to be made in order to lift this deck combat efficiency factors up to speed for it to be able to pose a much more even contendership levels in 1 versus 1 battles when facing other decks in this game. Alright, let's move over to the summation statement. The Israeli deck was at first proclaimed to be the finest and most strongest deck in the game. I think people regarded this deck as such because firstly they did not understand the concept behind it, secondly they did not test this deck in battle or discovered for themselves the deficiencies this deck houses within itself. Basically, and if you're being completely objective and completely honest about it, as we have been all along, it does have an answer for every contingency, but the answer mostly comes in forms of units that are ridiculously overpriced, not cost effective, lacking key weapons on them and such. Some come in the form of being ridiculously outclassed, and some are shitty and useless as opposed to what other decks are using. You are mostly using overpriced inferior units, so again, basically the Israeli deck is a somewhat balanced deck only in terms of the variety of units it houses within itself. It does have a vast variety of units for you to pick and choose from, but those units individually and by themselves are stricken by major deficiencies, lack of key weapons on them in some cases, to enable them to deal with multiple situations as opposed to what all other nation decks are using, which are simplistic overall combat effective units. And while other decks' deficiencies and downsides are being combated and compensated by the deck having super weapons and primary weapons, the Israeli deck deficiencies as it stands now are only compensated by having a variety of useless units for you to pick and choose from, also by having tremendously overpriced, lower than average, mediocre units to pick and choose from. Units that you just not use because considering the cost dynamics in 1 versus 1, it is almost not practical for you to even try using them, having the risk factor of losing them way above the clouds, because losing such units that are way overpriced and not too effective to justify their cost, or in other words, losing the points invested into them, could seal your fate at any stage during the battle. And on the other hand, powerful units the Israeli deck does have, like for example the Merkava Baz Super Heavy Tank, must and will operate when used without having the necessary support they desperately need in order for them to be used effectively and successfully in battle. Basically, if you're using powerful units that reside in the Israeli deck, you're clearly doing so at a high risk of wasting those points without making them count in any shape or form, because powerful units this deck has do not hold promise, not at the slightest, to be survivable considering what you have in your deck to go along with them into battle, and this deck suffers greatly because of that. I'm talking here about the concept of combined arms, which is a critical factor when playing this game. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot achieve any level of success with the Merkava Baz tank. Yes, you very well damn can, but it is most likely not to be dependent on your skill. Their success in the field will most certainly fall on and be much more dependent on the stupidity and worthlessness of your opponent, and in most cases your opponent will not miss or allow you to enjoy stronger units in the Israeli deck, because it is more than easy for any opponent to exploit this deck deficiencies and to deny you the ability to use such units in the game to achieve any level of success with them. The Hafiz will die from a sneeze, the Baz will be killed from the skies, the Maglan are only 5 fucking guys, and the accuracy on some of the Israeli units means they basically fire when closing their eyes. So we talked about this deck. The way to make it balanced in 1 versus 1 is simple. Add the Patriot anti-air defensive system to this deck. It will tie up a lot of balance issues in this deck. Lower the price of the Achzarit by 5 points. Give the Asur in the Recon tab good optics instead of poor optics. Add 1 frontal armor and 1 side armor to it, just as all the red for attack helicopters. The Asur is basically a flying tank. It is only fair that you would be that the game would be consistent with accuracy to have such an awesome machine, the proper and correct statistics and characteristics in order for it to live up to its reputation in the game. Add 1 machine gun to the HVMS Recon vehicle. Add 3 extra armor points on the Hafiz and the Pere frontal armor. The Bedouins in the Recon tab should be added a short-ranged Lao weapon, 525 meters range, low AP power of 8 points. The Maglans should be a 10-man crew again. The Barak anti-tank plane cost should be reduced by 5 points, same goes for the Kurnas. And the Kfir bomber price should be reduced to 105 points, with 1 extra unit per card when using it. And lastly, allow the Merkava 2A the ability to be purchased and for a reasonable price of 80 points. Reduce the price of the pattern to 105 points. And the Magach 7C Gimel AP power should be increased from 17 to 18 AP power, and the barrel of its gun should be increased to 120 millimeter. The price of getting it should also be increased to 100 points. That's it. Those are my recommendations. I hope you enjoyed my analysis videos on the Israeli deck. I hope the developers will take my analysis under advisement and under consideration, make the proper much needed adjustments for the betterment of this game and the balance of this game overall. And that's it. That's it for now. I wish you all best of luck on the battlefield. Karagoth signing off.